That is 11.8 trillion Kenyan shillings. If you are watching this video in Kenya, your share of this debt is around 236,000 Kenyan shillings, and that is just as of June 2025. Every man, woman, and child. A baby born today already owes a 250,000 bob before they take their first breath. But here is what nobody is explaining. Who do we actually owe this money to? How did we get here? And most importantly, can we ever pay it back? I analyzed the official annual public debt management report for the financial year 2024-2025, all the 90 pages of the government data to give you the complete verified picture of our national debt. No political spins, just facts straight from the National Treasury. Let's break this down. I am Jacob Nyende, and this is the factual analysis. Kenya's debt did not explode overnight, but the acceleration has been dramatic.
I, Uhuru Kenyatta.
When Uhuru Kenyatta took power in 2013, Kenya's total debt was 1.8 trillion Kenyan shillings. By the time he left in 2022, it had grown to 8.6 trillion. That is 378% increase in just 9 years.
Tumshangilie Mheshimiwa Rais kwa makofi anapopokea kitara hichi. Na ni dhahiri shahiri kwamba anakuwa amiri jeshi mkuu wa majeshi yote ya ulinzi ya Kenya.
Under Ruto's first 2.5 years, according to the official government report released in September 2025, our debt reached 11.8 trillion Kenyan shillings. That is an additional of 3.2 trillion shillings since President Ruto took power. Now here is the critical question. What did we borrow for? According to the National Treasury's own admission in this official report, here is where borrowed money actually went. 30% of that money went to infrastructure projects. 40% was put to recurrent expenditures including salary payment and government operations. Debt payment took 25% and other expenditures took 5%. 40% went to recurrent expenditures. I want you to take note of that. Paying salaries and keeping the lights on, not building wealth, and 25% went to paying all debts. We literally borrowed this money to pay back other loans. This is the textbook definition of debt spiral. Ladies and gentlemen, between June 2024 and June 2025 alone, just 12 months, Kenya's debt grew by 11.7%. That is cash 1.2 trillion added in a single year. The government of President William Ruto collected 2.4 trillion in revenue, but added a half of that amount in debt. Kenya's debt is split into two categories, ladies and gentlemen. We have the domestic debt. This is money we owe to Kenyans, and it's equivalent to 53.5% of our debt. We have the external debt. This is money we owe to foreigners, which is equivalent to 46.5% of our national debt, equivalent to 5.5 trillion. Yes, you heard that right. Over half of our debt is now owed to domestic creditors. Kenyan banks, pension funds, insurance companies. We are borrowing from ourselves. Let's start with external debt of 5.5 trillion we owe to foreign creditors. The single largest creditor is the International Development Association, IDA, the World Bank arm for poor countries like Kenya. It holds 30.3% of our external debt. These loans comes with conditions. According to reports, the current IMF program required Kenyans to remove fuel subsidies, reduce budget deficits, implement new taxes like the housing levy, restructure state-owned enterprises. Everyone talks about China, but China is not our greatest creditor. According to the official data, China holds 11.9% of our external debt, about 653 billion Kenyan shillings. This mainly came from the standard gauge railway, which took a loan of 547 billion, and various road projects in the country, including power infrastructure. But here is the surprise. China is actually our third largest creditor, not first. Foreign investors who bought Kenyan's Eurobonds, that is 18.6% of our external debt, about cash 1 trillion. Here is the problem with Eurobonds. They are very expensive. Like for example, we pay 7 to 10% interest on these bonds compared to 2.3% from World Bank loans. In the financial year loan 2024-25 alone, Kenya paid 987.5 billion just in interest across all debt, not paying down the debt but just interest. Healthcare budget in 2024-2025 was allocated 130 billion against the interest payments of 997.5 billion. So we are paying 7.6 times more on interest than on healthcare. The other 6.3 trillion, equivalent to 53.5% of total debt we owe to Kenyans, which includes commercial banks, pension funds, insurance companies, government parastatals, and individual Kenyans. When government borrows heavily from local banks, banks have less money to lend to the business. And that means business can't get loans to expand. Jobs aren't created, the economy suffers. This is called crowding out the private sector. But there is another hidden danger most people don't talk about: currency risk. Out of the 5.5 trillion external debt, 59.8% was borrowed in US dollars, 27% in euros, 5% in Japanese yen, 5% in Chinese yen, and British pound 2.5%. Why does this matter, ladies and gentlemen? When we borrowed in dollars and the shilling was trading at 120 to the dollar, we planned repayment based on that rate. But by June 2025, the shilling was at 129.2 per dollar. Against the euro, it depreciated 8.4%, and against the pound 7.7%. For example, when you borrow $1 billion at 120, this will be equivalent to 120 billion owed repayment. $1 billion at 129 is equal to 129 billion, a difference of 9 billion more. And we didn't borrow at a single extra dollar. Ladies and gentlemen, currency depreciation makes our debt more expensive automatically. Why debt isn't always bad, ladies and gentlemen? Now, before we panic, let me be clear here. Debt isn't always evil. Countries borrow money all time. The United States has 35 trillion debt. Japanese debt is over 250 of their GDP, but they are an economic powerhouse, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because they borrow to invest in things that generate more wealth than the debt costs. If you borrow cash 1 million at 5% interest to start a business that makes 300,000 profit per year, that's a good debt. You are generating more value than the cost of the loan. In Kenyan cases, some infrastructures has created value. The SGR moves cargo faster, though it is still making losses. The Nairobi Express way saves commuters 2+ hours daily. Power projects increase electricity access, ladies and gentlemen. But here is where Kenya crossed into dangerous territories. The official report states that Kenya's present value of debt to GDP ratio is 3.7%. The safe threshold recommended by IMF is 55%. We are 8.7% points over the dangerous zone. But the real crisis is in debt servicing. So So here is Kenya's financial year 2025 budget reality according to financial official data. So the total government revenue was 2.4 trillion, as I mentioned earlier. Debt servicing was 1.7 trillion, which is 71% of all the revenue. So 71% of every shilling the government collects goes straight to paying debt. That leaves only 28